sector capital projects, including the Channel Tunnel Terminal Ashford, Royal Opera House redevelopment, Royal Albert Hall refurbishment, plus several universities, 3 prisons, 6 acute hospitals, and many other large, complex public facilities. Currently involved in most building schools for future scheme in procurement and in joint ventures as lead bidder and in other supply chains as LEP provider. Also leading teams managing delivery of 18 academies for DFES. Paul's recent achievements include establishing a key position for the DFTS, National Technical Services Framework, and taking E.C. Harris into prime contracting through the establishment of an integrated supply chain that has been shortlisted for partnership for schools D&B Contractors Framework. And just very briefly, before E.C. Harris, Paul was a director at Faber Mansell Limited, also an associate partner at Building Design Partnership, and was an engineer at Horley and Partners, and previous to that, back in the 1980s, was at Oscar, Faber and Partners. Hopefully, I know I had to skip through some of that. Believe it or not, that was actually the abridged version, so there's quite a lot to cover. Without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Gladys.
James covered everything there. To start, we're quite different from E.C. Harris, as you probably see. We're in our infancy really as a business. We're in our first year. We just finished our first year now. We've grown quite a lot in that first year. But in that time, we've sort of seen, there's sort of seen one big thing missing in architecture is actually a sort of appreciation of the financing of a project. How sort of before the architect gets to sort of design something, how in fact that project is financed from the very beginning. This is sort of a picture of the architect's pocketbook, which is sort of de facto architect book to have on your desk at work. It's got everything in there, from plumbing to sort of roof structures, but actually private equity is completely missing from that. We met each other at the Richard Rogers Partnership, which you probably know is quite a major sort of world famous architecture practice in London. And we met there after our graduation in architecture from the University, the Nottingham University of Oxford Brookes, where we studied the first part of our architectural training. And then we go on to sort of do a professional practice where we do work with Richard Rogers. And then we appreciated the quality of design added to the value of the project, the overall value of the project, and the value in terms of the social responsibility that an architect has to a project, as well as the sort of client's responsibility, which is there's a dual thing in architecture about the client responsibility and social responsibility. And I think that's where the architects have to be very careful in terms of where they position themselves in private equity deals, because you can't be seen to be sort of one-sided either way. In that sense. I worked at Richard Rogers on the Leadenhall Tower. Christian worked on the National Assembly of Wales, and James on the small project, which is the Maggie Centre in London. As you see, the varying scales of project we worked on sort of gave us an insight at different points. Although it was sort of like almost a brief experience within architectural practice, I think it was enough to give us a taster of how we could build our own practice in the future. I went then, and Christian went also to the Architecture Association to finish our diploma in architecture. And James went to UCL to finish his diploma in architecture. Then we decided really to set our own practice up, Lattice, where we would try and sort of encompass some of the ideas we'd taken from Richard Rogers, but also some of the ideas to do with financing and how we can put multidisciplinary teams together to try and make projects happen out of the sort of traditional procurement methods. I mean, the first thing, what really is an architect? As I said, architects take about 7 years worth of training really to become an architect. And also, when is an architect not an architect? This is a sort of close point really, because in the UK, anybody can submit a design for a building to planning. And anybody could submit a design for building control and get something built. We don't actually need an architect at all in the UK. Now, we're not officially architects because we haven't registered with the Architects Registration Board, which is the final step that we have to do to become an architect. Now, there are a few reasons why we didn't do this. I mean, as a young company, there are certain limitations from the professional code of practice which would prevent us from doing commercial development and in some ways advertising our services to industries which may sort of take our services and use them for commercial demand. So that's one of the main reasons we haven't registered in, and we probably won't register in the foreseeable future because we want to experiment and test our ideas in terms of how we can establish a practice which incorporates development within architecture. And sort of give a background really, I mean you have to sort of appreciate, I always think it's so critical to appreciate how, for financiers, to appreciate how architects think, but also for architects to appreciate how financiers think. So I think that's part of a critical part of the design process really. I think that's in one way missing. And this is a sort of a typical picture from a studio, it's slightly blurred, but this is typically how one would discuss a project in a studio environment. So you present your work to a series of architects normally. So it's very insular in that sense. There's no sort of no appreciation really of how a project is financed, or the sort of economic side of a project is sort of missed out in that sense, in educational terms. So we want to look at ways of how can we sort of incorporate the way architects think, which is in a way kind of inventive. The architecture education is design-led, purely design-led, and sort of encourages a kind of interest in invention and a spirit of sort of like discovering new ideas and ways of doing things. But we always also think that that's the same with financing and private equity. There's also creativity there. But if we can marry the two somehow to develop projects, then we want to sort of a winning program. I think Christian and Jin's going to go through some of our projects, which step by step we try to incorporate a new way of fee arrangements for these projects.
So we're going to sort of look at design structure in a whole, as in architecture. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to present 4 case studies. I think it's already established we're only 1 year old, so we're quite little in that sense. But actually, we've, as Rob mentioned, we've achieved a lot in that year. And the way we've positioned our case studies it's a sort of a gradual change from, in terms of restructuring, from what our sort of initial projects to our more current work, where we've started including very much the things that James has outlined as the topic of discussion, rolling in fees potentially for deals, and the thing that sort of lacks quite a lot in architecture fee structuring is sort of incentive. And so, I mean, through the kind of year and our 4 case studies, it's more looking at how these various elements have slowly come in, one project after the other, where we've started changing our slant slightly on the way we think about the projects. I think in principle, though, and I'll probably establish this now, is that from a technical standpoint of view, we only have the sort of it's only the principle of private equity that we know and that we're trying to adopt. So if you start firing questions about IRR, or I just have no clue. So it's more about the principle and how that can be accommodated. And I think eventually, as Rob will sort of explain, how we can bring the financial creativity in as well. I think it's just going. This is a very traditional kind of project team, and it gets a lot more complicated. There's lots of different structures, but I mean generally the traditional methods. You have the client and you have the architect as agent to the client, and then the architect, basically all the advisory consultants and the contractor, the subcontractors, people who build it, all then sort of answer to the architect, and he sort of has a contract administration role, so he administers the whole project. And then also, the traditional fee structure, I think, is probably important to get this across. That I think the way architects generally do fees is, there's two ways, really. One is a percentage-based fee, and that would be, a percentage. And this is a sort of fee guide, it's like an average fee guideline published by REBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects. And it shows kind of a percentage-based fee on the overall construction cost of the building. The other way is fixed fee. Now, Percentages are generally preferred by architects because they sort of, they allow the architect more time to consider the design more carefully. Although I suppose on the